Behind me is the second generation Kona Libre. Gone is the wide swath of variations that they've had before, and replacing it is an alloy version, and the one that's behind me, a carbon Libre CR. More interestingly, there's actually only two variations. You can get this as a frame set, or you can get the build behind me, the SRAM Apex Explorer Access group set. And amongst all the birds that are being really loud right now, I have to be honest, I like this bike a whole lot more than I thought. So I've been able to live with this bike for the last few months. I'm going to tell you about what I like, what I dislike about it, walk you through the things I've learned about this along the way, and ultimately we'll figure out who this bike is for. You ready? So am I. Right here behind me is the lone build that the Kona Libre is available as. You get a SRAM Apex Explorer Access drivetrain right here, wireless shifting, 11 to 44 cassette, 12 speeds out back, SRAM 42 tooth chainring up front. You get a Ritchie seat post out back and a Ritchie bar and stem up front. Nice to see here as an alloy setup. You get WTB saddle, Easton rims, Arc 25 offset with a 25mm internal rim width, and then you're getting Formula hubs. None of it is particularly flashy or special, but it is reliable and consistent. In this size small, or size 50, I believe, this bike weighs in at 19.1 pounds, set up tubeless without pedals. Okay, ride impressions, Kona Libre. So I've been on this bike for a month or thereabouts, probably a half dozen rides. Got a good idea of what this bike's good at and what it's not so good at. Now, I haven't ridden the previous generation Libre bikes, but I have ridden a whole bunch of other gravel bikes in the last few years, and have a pretty good idea of how this stacks up. All right, well, we're doing some climbing, so we might as well talk about climbing, right? And you know, if you listen to the Velo podcast, you'll hear Mike Levy talk about how gravel bikes need to be slacker. They just need to be better equipped for mountain biking, basically. And while I generally do agree with him, it is awfully fun to ride a bike like the Libre CR that doesn't have a front end that flops around at low speeds. I don't know. Yeah, the head tube angle is a little bit steeper than what one might think from a company like Kona, and the trail figures are not quite as high as one might expect as well. But this bike is like quite a bit of fun on a climb. Like, it feels decently responsive, even this Apex Access build. And I think in 2025, it strikes a good balance of road feel for someone who's more inclined to ride road bikes than mountain bikes. You know, when you're descending or when you're going on the straights, you still have some of the confidence that you'd get from a modern gravel bike. Which way are you going? Let me know. All right, straight. That's cool. Okay, I'm coming on your left. All right. We'll get back to the short. I think the one spot where that kind of quicker handling that you get from like kind of these racier gravel bikes starts to really come into play is when the speeds rise and it gets particularly chunky. I'm finding on this bike, well, you know what, you'll just see it. Let's go. Okay, as you can see on the descents, this bike is actually pretty good. It's better than I thought it would be. It's a lot of fun. It doesn't quite have the stability that I would want, and I think part of that comes down to the fit. The stem that this bike comes with in the size small is pretty darn short, and it makes me definitely on the bigger end of this bike, which means I need to put a longer stem on this bike to own this bike myself. And that would, I think, add some straight line stability. Kona being a mountain bike brand, I would have loved to see something just a little bit more progressive from this bike. You could have still made it zippy and fast for unbound types, but gone a little bit more progressive in my eyes. Lower bottom bracket, slightly lower bottom bracket, slightly longer front center, I think would have added some straight line stability without getting rid of that kind of cornering ability on road that I've come to appreciate with this bike. Hello. Yeah, go that way. Thank you. Thanks so much. All right, we're back. Let's talk about the frame really quick. I think one thing to know about this bike is that it's racier than the previous generation Libres have been. And I think that's because Kona has been able to free this bike to allow it to be a little bit sportier feeling. A lot of that has to do with their Ouroboros in the lineup, which I'll link down below. We have the review for that bike, which is basically a drop bar mountain bike. This one gets to be a little bit sportier. Yes, you still get a lot of the considerations that you'd expect from a brand that I would say is best known for their mountain bikes. You get a really nice like chainstay cover right here to prevent against chain slap. You're getting fully routed internal cabling right here. You're getting external cabling at the head tube area. And while the bottom bracket is a press fit 86 bottom bracket, which I wouldn't necessarily expect from a brand like Kona, you do get the SRAM UDH at this point. You do get fender mounts front and rear.
Tire clearance is rated at a pretty minimal 700 by 45 millimeters. However, as you can see right here, you can easily fit a 45, if not a 50 in my experience.
As far as mounts are concerned, as I said, you do get fender mounts front and rear. You get 3 bottle cage mounts, 2 here, 1 at the bottom bracket, and then you're getting your top tube bag mount as well. 27.2 seat post, totally round, totally standard fitment across the board. Overall, if you're into mountain bikes and you're looking for something that's lower maintenance, this Kona Libre is probably going to be right up your alley. As I've mentioned, there is a front derailleur mount right here. You can run up to a 50 to 34 2x drivetrain right here, or you can run up to a 46 tooth 1x chainring if you're so inclined. As far as geometry is concerned, there is an obvious bent here towards being in kind of a more aggressive position. Kona even goes as far as to say in their copy that they want to put the rider in a race-ready position, whatever that means. Overall, you have 6 sizes. As far as fit geometry is concerned, it is more aggressive than the previous Libre was, but it's far less aggressive than what you're going to find from a Cervelo Aspero or a Cannondale Super X, much less the Ventum GS1 that we reviewed not too long ago. Overall, I would call it sporty if you are looking for something that is a lot more upright with less saddle to bar drop, or basically 0. You're gonna wanna look at the Kona Ouroboros. As far as handling geometry is concerned here, you have between a 72 and 75 millimeter bottom bracket drop, which isn't quite as low as what you'd find from like a BMC URS or the like. However, you do get a consistent 70.5 degree head tube angle with a 50 mil fork offset across the sizes. That nets you a trail figure in the mid 70 millimeter range, according to my personal calculations. I think that is actually bang on for what this bike wants to be, as something that is going to be stable through the chunky stuff and still feels sporty-ish. Okay, let's talk about long-term livability and longevity with this bike, and I think it's mostly positive, and I think Kona did a good job. First parts are obvious right here. External cable routing makes it easy to swap out your barn stem according to your fit and adjust your fit as well, as I've done here by raising and lowering the stem. You also get fully guided cable routing internally, and so that means that if you stick a hose in on one side, it's going to come out the other without needing any extra tools. I think that's pretty nice. Another thing to note right here, you don't have any protection really around the bottom bracket or nothing major, but you do have a really hardy like chainstay cover right here that says Libre on it. I think that's pretty good. You've got 27.2 seat post, lets you run a dropper post if you really wanted to without issue. 160 mil rotors native right here, so you can run a 180 with an adapter if you really wanted to. I think the elephant in the room here is going to be the press fit 86 bottom bracket. Press fit bottom brackets aren't inherently bad. Yes, they do require more tools to use, more specialty tools and more expensive tools than a standard threaded bottom bracket, especially an English threaded one. But as far as reliability is concerned, no creaks, groans, issues with this bottom bracket, and that's usually the case with PF86. I think the issue that I have here is that if you're running a SRAM drivetrain right here with the PF86 shell, the bearings are really small with these, and they're definitely going to wear out more quickly, at least in my experience, compared to a Shimano bottom bracket with a 24 mil spindle that is smaller and the larger bearings to compensate. Besides that, you're likely buying the Kona Libre because it's going to be easy to work on, and for the most part, it delivers on that promise. All right, we've talked a lot about the frame, we've talked about geometry, we've talked about ride impressions. How does the rest of the build kit perform? And I have to say that for a bike that is kind of on the entry level of these middle to higher end bikes, I think it's really well considered. They've made great choices here. The Ritchie barn stem combination, really comfortable, easy to adjust, comfortable on long rides and short rides alike. The ergonomics for this SRAM Apex access lever right here are pretty good, I would say. It's a little bit shorter than what you're gonna get from other levers right here, not that that's a bad thing. And while I do think that these hood ergonomics do fall a little bit short of what you're gonna find from the latest generation of SRAM stuff, I am pretty into this overall, and I think the braking performance is solid. The wheels don't feel especially heavy, and the tires roll quick, both on and off the road. Again, they aren't as perhaps as cushy as I would like, and they aren't as responsive as I would like, but for a bike with SRAM Apex access, I think that's perfectly acceptable. I think the one thing that I can fault with this build right here is probably the 11 to 44 cassette out back. I think that even though this bike is kind of race ready and kind of sportier, whatever that means, I do think that an 11 to 50 cassette right here, especially paired with this 42 tooth chainring or slightly larger, would have matched the characteristics of this bike quite nicely. All right, let's start wrapping it up. Pros, cons, who this bike is for. I think the first thing to note here is I think that Kona did a really good job in speccing the bike. Even with the Apex Axis drivetrain, I think the touch points are really well considered. And overall, I think this bike is going to be durable and built to last. On that note, I think the ride quality and handling is well done overall. I think that it feels sporty on the road, even though it is kind of a longer feeling gravel bike. And off-road, I think that this bike kind of hides its weight pretty darn well. I think overall the finishing here is quite nice too. Everything seems together pretty well. The brakes set up really nicely, and out of the box this is ready to go. I didn't have to make too many adjustments. As far as cons are concerned, while I do think that this bike does feel greater than the sum of its parts, the price point is a little bit higher than what I'd expect for the spec sheet found here. Who's the Kona Libre CR for? I think this is for someone who's looking for kind of a sportier ride. The previous generation bike was a jack of all trades, master of none. This one does a much better job of nailing the design brief while making a bike that is going to be easy to maintain now and into the future. And so what's the final verdict on the Kona Libre CR? Would I avoid it? Would I ask a friend about it? Would I think hard about it? Or would I go out and buy it? Well, I think right now, I would think hard about it. This bike, as I said, feels like it's greater than the sum of its parts, but the higher price point than what I'd expect for the build kit does give me some pause. That's it, everyone. Let us know in the comments below what you think about the Kona Libre. Check out our full review up now on Velo. We'll see you on the next one. Happy trails.